Hello and welcome to this lecture on biorisk assessment. In this lecture, I will be discussing the various guidelines and the pathogen safety data sheets and their application to risk assessment of biological agents. All of these lectures can be downloaded, reused, repurposed, and remixed and shared as they are distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution License. My earlier lectures focused on the AMP cycle, which is the risk assessment, risk mitigation, and performance assessment cycle. During the process of risk assessment, we commence with hazard identification. However, we also need specific guidelines. With this in mind, I have delved into the WHO Laboratory Biosafety Manual in an earlier lecture. And in this lecture, we will be delving into the pathogen safety data sheets, which is a very useful document for biorisk managers. These are your learning objectives for this current lecture. I will introduce you to the process of risk assessment for a known biological agent. I will discuss the key points that must be addressed during the risk assessment, and I will discuss the pathogen safety data sheets, which are the PSDS from the Government of Canada. These are your learning outcomes. Upon completion of this module, you should demonstrate the ability to develop an instrument for risk assessment. Now, this instrument is in the form of a survey in order to conduct a biological risk assessment. And we reference the WHO LBM, so I'll refer to the World Health Organization Laboratory Biosafety Manual using this particular acronym WHO LBM throughout this module. We will address specific criteria and you will learn how to address these criteria as risk assessment is based on the biological agent that you are currently intending to work with. And finally, you will learn how to apply the information from the PSDS to assess the risk posed by a known biological agent. So these should be your learning outcomes which you must focus upon during this particular module. When we discuss risk assessment, we always look at what is known as the scope. Now there are risks that are within the scope of this assessment. So you have your iceberg and this is what you see and this is what you can assess. And then you can address this by applying the pertinent controls. However, there are risks that are beyond the scope of the assessment, and this is what you do not see. For instance, if you are working with a risk group 2 biological agent, and one of your laboratory workers has an allergy which he or she has not reported earlier because they were not aware of it, exposure to this RG2 biological agent can cause morbidity or even mortality. So these are risks which you must anticipate, but they are what are known as unknown risks that are beyond the scope of assessment. We will now look at microbiological risk assessment based on the WHO Laboratory Biosafety Manual and discuss the development of an instrument for risk assessment. These are some of the factors which you must consider when you conduct a risk assessment. The first one is the pathogenicity of the biological agent and the infectious dose. Is the microorganism a pathogen which has been reported to cause mortality and morbidity? And what is the infectious dose? How many colony forming units or particles of this particular microorganism are sufficient in order to cause infection? And this varies from individual to individual, from environmental condition to environmental condition, but you must assess this risk in terms of the pathogenicity and infectious dose. The second aspect is the potential outcome of exposure. Does it result in morbidity, mortality? What is the natural route of infection? Is it via the nasal passages? Is it through the skin? Or is it subdermal below the skin? Or is it via ingestion? What is the route of infection? What are the other routes of infection? Does it have multiple routes of infection? And are these the result of laboratory manipulation? So for instance, if you are culturing a lab pathogen, you're basically cultivating a pathogen in the laboratory using enriched media. If there is a spill in the lab with the enriched media, this particular pathogen is more likely to cause harm to the laboratory workers because you have increased the culture volume, and this represents laboratory manipulation. Then we look at the stability of the biological agent in the environment. For instance, in the case of coronavirus, there have been multiple reports of stability studies reporting that the virus may be stable for longer than other viruses, for a longer duration of time in the environment. Then we look at the concentration and culture volume of the biological agent. Now, as a general principle, when working with pathogens in the laboratory, we must minimize this culture volume because a very high culture volume can lead to potential spills and the consequent infections. We also look at the presence of a suitable host. For instance, if you are cultivating a parasite in the laboratory, if there is no mosquito or the vector to transmit this parasite from the animal into the human, the likelihood of infection and transmission is very, very low. We also look at a priori information, which is available from research papers and clinical reports and epidemiological studies. We look at the laboratory procedures during risk assessment. Does it involve centrifugation, aerosolization of the content using pipettes, or does it involve any other procedures such as microscopy, which can pose a risk to the laboratory user? Any genetic manipulation? Has the microbe or the biological agent been genetically modified? And we look at local availability of effective prophylaxis, which is preventive treatment or therapeutic interventions for this particular pathogen. This is a risk instrument. It's an example, and you may have to adapt this for your own laboratory or your biorisk management scenario. The first question is, has the biological agent been reported to be a pathogen? So if newly emerging pathogens may not have been reported earlier, and this may lead to lack of alertness on the part of the biorisk managers. So every biological agent must be treated with caution based on earlier reports as well as currently developing situations. Does exposure to the biological agent lead to morbidity? So if this is yes and this is yes, so morbidity means your laboratory workers are likely to get sick if they are exposed and may have to be hospitalized. Is the route of infection via inhalation? If yes, then you click yes. Is the route of infection via contact? No, then you click no. Is the biological agent stable in the environment? Of course, if you pose this question, you have to pose other questions such as, if yes, then how long, how many seconds, and is it viable on surfaces or is it viable in the air at that local temperature? Has the biological agent been genetically modified? This can be obtained via genome sequencing reports. And is the treatment readily available? These are some of the key questions which you must address when you develop an instrument for risk assessment. We now move on to the next instrument, and this must be discussed with your principal investigators and researchers at your laboratory. So the first one is basically related to training. Has adequate training been provided? The terminology used here is adequate or sufficient. You can refer to the specific definition for adequate in the CWA 15793 Laboratory Biorisk Management Manual. Adequate contingency plans. This relates to accidental spills. So if you have said yes and yes, the risk is significantly lower. Facility equipped with essential equipment. So as I mentioned earlier, the essential equipment is a biological safety cabinet based on the risk groups, the 4 risk groups. So you require at least a basic laboratory biological safety cabinet. And if you have yes, you click here, and then if no, you proceed to the next question. Is PPE available? And the type of PPEs. So in our lecture on PPEs and personal protective equipment, I will discuss the various kind of PPEs available to mitigate the risks posed by inhalation via cutaneous or subcutaneous entry and other routes of entry. The next one is related to secondary containment. Is the facility equipped with a waste disposal system or an effluent disposal system? I will discuss this in the engineering controls. Number 6 is your facility secure in terms of biosecurity? And finally, do we have specific SOPs to manage the pathogen? For instance, if you are working in a laboratory with Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and in the current situation you have an emergency and you have to suddenly change to working with coronavirus, the SOPs which are applicable to Mycobacterium tuberculosis will not be applicable to coronavirus. So you will have to revise and retrain your staff and develop new SOPs to address the new and emerging biological risk. We now move on to the pathogen safety data sheets, and we must appreciate the efforts of the Government of Canada in developing an excellent manual for laboratory users and biorisk managers. Now this pathogen safety data sheet, if you are a chemist, you will recall there is something known as a material safety data sheet, and that discusses the various chemicals and their combustibilities and safety elements. And this pathogen safety data sheet focuses specifically on biological agents. Let us look at the various sections and I will discuss them in detail. So this is the pathogen safety data sheet. You can access it at the website. It is not in the form of a document. It's in the form of a living document which is updated constantly by the Government of Canada. So thank you very much to the Government of Canada for developing this excellent resource material for public use. And this is the pathogen safety data sheet app. It comes from Health Canada, also from the Government of Canada. Another excellent resource for your bench. You can use it on your benchtop with your mobile phone. However, please do not take your mobile phone into a biosafety level 3 laboratory, as it can lead to transmission of infections via contact. So this is the pathogen safety data sheet app. You can find it on the Android and Apple stores. Let us delve into the various sections of the PSDS, and this is the template which is utilized for the development of the PSDS. So this template can be used to develop PSDS for emerging pathogens as well as known pathogens. The first section focuses on the infectious agent itself. So we have the name, the common name, for instance, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and you will have agent type, which is bacterium. Taxonomy will list the taxonomy, the group it belongs to, the genus, species for scientific usage, and these are the synonyms, other commonly used names for that particular biological agent. The characteristics of the biological agent, such as its infection cycle, it's basically a life cycle, as well as the route of transmission, a brief description of the biological agent, as well as the properties related to the biological agent. So the section 1 basically focuses on the type of culture which is being used in most laboratories. For instance, in microbial laboratories, the general practice is to culture the microbial agent on specific enriched medium or selected medium. And this manual provides insights into the infectious agent and its culture characteristics. Section 2 focuses on hazard identification. In this section, we focus on pathogenicity and toxicity. The word toxicity has been used here because it also concerns biological toxins, communicability, transmission in a community-based setting, epidemiology, the host range, Is it a zoonotic virus or biological agent, or is it confined to Homo sapiens or humans? The infectious dose. Now this term infectious dose is used routinely. However, the actual definition for infectious dose is not very clear. For instance, we cannot conduct what is known as a Koch's postulate study with human subjects, as it is a breach of ethics. So infectious doses, for instance, you cultivate a virus in the lab and you have, for instance, 10,000 viral particles per cc of the medium, and then you expose an animal, laboratory animal, using a murine study, for instance a mouse. You expose it to the biological agent and then you check for infection. So you do a graded study. You see 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 and check the dosage which causes an infection. Now this is actually termed as the infectious dose. However, these studies are not really indicative, as there'll be a variation between human subjects as well as mice, and these should be treated with caution. This is the infectious dose. And then you have incubation. Incubation is the duration between actual exposure to the biological agent and the manifestation of the symptoms in terms of morbidity or mortality. Section 3 focuses on dissemination or distribution of the pathogen. For instance, if you have a dengue virus, is there a reservoir for the virus? Is there a case of zoonosis or reverse zoonosis? This means, is the pathogen transmitted from animals to humans and vice versa, from human to animal, or not? So these are questions which must be addressed in risk assessment, and they have been delineated in the PSTS. And then the presence of suitable vectors. Certain viruses may complete their life cycle in specific vectors, such as sleeping sickness, malaria, and the dengue, and this may require the presence of the vector in order for them to be disseminated across the population. Section 4 focuses on stability and viability, and this relates to environmental stability as well as stability in the host. Drug susceptibility, as you must be well aware by now, a large number of microbes are basically resistant to drugs, and they have developed what is known as antibiotic resistance profiles, and we must ascertain this in order to prevent laboratory acquired infections and hospital acquired infections. We also look at drug resistance, susceptibility to disinfectants. I will be discussing this in a lecture on disinfection. So when we expose a biological agent to a specific disinfectant, there is something known as contact time, or the duration for which the biological agent must be exposed to that particular sterilizing or disinfecting agent, as well as the concentration. So this must be tested. There are studies which have been conducted for various biological agents, scientific reports related to susceptibility to disinfectant. We look at physical inactivation, at what temperature is inactivated. For instance, in the case of coronavirus, when we receive a patient sample, we heat the sample to around 60 degrees Celsius in a heat block prior to processing, and this inactivates the virus. So each biological agent will have its own characteristics for physical inactivation, and this can be done in the form of chemical inactivation as well as heat treatment or UV radiation, as the case may be. And there is another factor, which is survival outside of the host. For instance, Bacillus anthracis forms spores. So the bacillus itself will not survive well in the environment. It needs an enriched medium, or at least a soil which is containing sufficient nutrient in order to grow. However, when it sporulates, it forms spores. These spores remain viable in the environment, and they can be dispersed via air streams, and they can enter into human hosts and infect human hosts. Okay, so these are factors which must be considered. Survival outside the host must focus on the sporulation characteristics as well. Section 5 focuses on first aid and medical treatment. So we focus on surveillance, medical surveillance. This may involve a population study. In your respective countries, you may have a surveillance system, and certain pathogens are classified as notifiable pathogens. So for instance, if a clinic reports a case of cholera in a specific country and it's basically a notifiable disease, the medical health practitioner must notify the local health authority, and this will in turn be transmitted across the network chain. We also focus on first aid and treatment, the presence or the availability of an effective vaccine, and prophylaxis as well, preventive treatment. Generally, in a laboratory setting, laboratory workers are inoculated with a vaccine against specific biological agents which your laboratory may be working with in order to prevent the infection by those biological agents. Section 6 focuses on laboratory hazards, in which case you have LAIs, laboratory acquired infections, the sources and the specimens, primary hazards and special hazards. In a laboratory setting, the culture volume of the biological agent is increased significantly due to various processes. You may also have instances where you have spills, accidents and incidents, and this increases the risk of laboratory acquired infections. The pathogen may also mutate in the laboratory and increase its infectivity. Now, the sources and specimens is also another issue which must be considered. For instance, if you're working with patient samples, patient-derived samples such as serum, blood, body fluids, or tissue, there may be other laboratory hazards such as the presence of the other pathogens in the patient which have not been included in the report. And these can pose a risk to laboratory workers. There are also special hazards which may be associated with the culture of that particular biological agent in a specific cycle or a specific working environment, such as an enriched culture medium. Section 7 focuses on exposure controls and personal protection. And this is basically where you address risk group, the classification of the biological agents into the 4 risk groups, the containment levels at your laboratory or your facility. So if you are working with risk group 3 and above, you need to have the appropriate BSL facility. And I will discuss this when we focus on engineering controls and the overall risk mitigation approach. Protective clothing, PPEs, are very important, and other protection. I have included this basic hierarchy over here to indicate the mitigation strategy, which we will discuss in the lecture series on risk mitigation. Section 8 focuses on handling and storage. So how do we handle spills? What is the spill cleanup SOP? Or if there's a very large spill, which is highly unlikely as you are working only in test tube levels or 50 ml or 100 ml of media. But if you have very large spills, such as in environments which use a bioreactor or fermenter of 500 liters, is there a SOP for handling this contingency in case of a spill? Okay, that's what we look at. Disposal. What is the SOP for the disposal of that particular biological agent? Again, you have to look at the susceptibility of the biological agent to heat and chemical treatment. The general route is via the usage of an incinerator or autoclaving system and effluent disposal. And storage. Is the biological agent viable in storage? Or do you want to keep it viable in storage and maintain its viability for future downstream applications such as vaccine development, or do you want to destroy it and maintain it in the storage as DNA or RNA, which is suitable for analysis? Section 9 focuses on regulatory and other information. This information must be included in your PHDS. Now, every PHDS is a control document which is developed by the biorisk manager for that respective facility. For instance, if a biological agent has certain characteristics in a tropical country, the characteristics may be different in a temperate country, and this must be taken into consideration. So the regulatory information must be included in the pathogen safety data sheet, the date on which the information has been updated, the person who updated the information and the current references, and this completes the PHDS template. Now, in order to identify or determine if your biological agent belongs to a specific risk group or has been categorized into a specific risk group, all you need to do is visit the PHDS, key in the correct name of your biological agent, for example, Bacillus anthracis, and then you search for all of these information in the PHDS itself. This brings us to the end of this particular lecture. So in this lecture, we are focused on microbiological risk assessment using the WHO LBM as a reference. We have understood the scope of risk assessment as I indicated in the iceberg example. There are certain risks which are seen and certain risks which are unseen, and no matter how much or how exhaustive a biorisk management strategy may be, there will always be certain risks which you cannot predict. However, your role as a biorisk manager is to ensure that the risk assessment is thorough and comprehensive. We have also looked at the pathogen safety data sheet, and again I thank the Government of Canada for this very useful reference which has helped me over the past years and also helped thousands or hundreds of thousands of biorisk managers across the world. And we also looked at developing your own instrument. So at this stage you should be able to develop your own instrument for risk assessment. This is in the form of a questionnaire. As an initiative on your behalf, I want you to develop your own instrument for risk assessment in your specific situation. Focus on the basic questions which I have addressed in this particular lecture and deepen them. For instance, if it says the biological agent is infective at a dosage of 15 CFU, you try and look deeper into that. Is it infective at that particular temperature, and so on and so forth. So this is basically what I wanted to introduce to you. And in the next lecture, I will move on to risk mitigation. In risk mitigation, I will discuss the application of the 5 controls to mitigate the risks posed by biological agents. I will also discuss engineering controls in detail with facility design and the writing of standard operating procedures. Thank you very much for watching this lecture in biorisk management. Stay biosafe.